Okay, let's talk about this Jared Kushner thing. It's something. Like watching a golden retriever attempt brain surgery, you know? The sheer audacity is almost impressive. Here's a guy who previously demonstrated diplomatic skill by successfully negotiating the price of a Manhattan parking space, now standing in Tel Aviv, taking credit for a ceasefire. A ceasefire that, let's be real, was less about lasting peace and more about preventing further bad press for everyone involved. The optics were strong, admittedly. Trump's crowd chanting his name, Netanyahu briefly sidelined. It's a good look if you're aiming for maximum self-aggrandizement. The deal itself? 20 points of stuff? Vague commitments. Promises that have been made and broken approximately 1 million times before. It feels less like a solution to an intractable conflict and more like a really well-branded holding pattern. Which brings us to the core question. Is this diplomacy or is it just some next-level grift? The answer, obviously, is leaning heavily towards the latter. Kushner's sudden interest in ending suffering conveniently coincides with a massive opportunity for redevelopment, and therefore, profit. He's not exactly volunteering his time out of the goodness of his heart. Affinity Partners isn't running on good vibes and charitable donations. He and Witkoff are deal guys, as he cheerfully admits. Not policy wonks, not historians, just people who understand how to move money around, and that's fine, truly. It's just a little unsettling when that skill set is applied to something as delicate as the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The whole thing feels less like peacemaking and more like scouting locations for the next luxury resort. It's late-stage capitalism distilled into its purest form, turn tragedy into a revenue stream, and call it progress. Right, so last time we were talking about how this whole Gaza ceasefire thing feels off, like someone decided to apply a timeshare sales pitch to geopolitics. And honestly, that's putting it mildly. It's applied to something as delicate as the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The whole thing feels less like peacemaking and more like scouting locations for the next luxury resort. It's late-stage capitalism distilled into its purest form, turn tragedy into a revenue stream, and call it progress. And at the center of this is Jared Kushner, who apparently believes he's solved everything by being a deal guy. Which, okay, fair enough, he and Witkoff are real estate people. They understand what makes people tick, according to them. Except, most people they understand probably want favorable zoning laws, not lasting peace in the Middle East. It's like hiring a plumber to perform brain surgery. Sure, they're good at pipes, but that doesn't translate. The thing is, this isn't about some innate diplomatic genius. This deal guy approach is just a different kind of ruthlessness. They're not bothered with the history, the nuances, or the actual human cost. It's all leverage and incentives. What can they get us out of this? And, crucially, who are they willing to strong-arm to get it? Apparently, Trump just makes it impossible for Netanyahu to say no, which is terrifyingly efficient but also deeply undemocratic. It's less negotiation and more a really insistent landlord demanding rent. And the fact that Kushner's family has been handing out pro-Israel donations for decades doesn't exactly scream impartiality, does it? It feels like we're watching a particularly cynical episode of Succession, only with higher stakes and actual bodies on the line. It's all very neat, if you ignore the screaming ethical problems and the fact that people are still suffering. But then again, ignoring those things is kind of the point, isn't it? The whole operation runs on a quiet understanding. The potential profits outweigh any moral objections. And that, frankly, is just depressing. Right, so this whole deal guy thing, it's a lot. The narrative being pushed is that Jared Kushner represents a new breed of diplomat, unburdened by history professors and their dusty books. Apparently, actually understanding the decades-long tangle of grievances in the Middle East is less valuable than knowing how to negotiate a good price on a Manhattan condo. And, honestly, the 25 books comment, it's just pathetic. Like, he thought osmosis would kick in or something. You read about quantum physics, and suddenly you're qualified to mediate international conflict. The core issue here isn't incompetence, though there's plenty of that. It's a fundamental misunderstanding of scale. Real estate is, at its heart, transactional. You have parties with defined interests, a finite asset, and the goal is to come to an agreement where everyone walks away marginally happier with their bank account. Gaza isn't a property. It's not even really about land, despite what anyone says. It's generations of trauma, displacement, political failures, and deeply held beliefs. Trying to apply a cost-benefit analysis to that situation is, well, it's just dumb. Like trying to fix a broken heart with a strongly worded contract. And let's not pretend this came out of nowhere. Charles Kushner, the elder Kushner, has been cultivating relationships within pro-Israeli circles for decades. He basically laid the groundwork for all of this. It wasn't about Jared suddenly discovering an aptitude for diplomacy. It was about leveraging existing connections and a pre-existing worldview, one that sees economic investment as the solution to everything. The idea that you can just make it impossible for an Israeli prime minister to say no by showering them with support is something. It's like thinking you can convince a cat not to claw your furniture by giving it a really nice scratching post. Maybe it works sometimes, but you're still dealing with a cat, and the underlying problem, the actual suffering, the historical injustice, remains completely untouched. The whole thing feels less like peacemaking and more like extremely elaborate financial planning disguised as statesmanship. It's unsettling, frankly. Right, so we've established this ceasefire feels off, like a particularly polished timeshare pitch. And it's not just the vague sense of unease that comes with watching someone leverage tragedy for profit. There's a whole lineage behind this, which is to say, the Kushner family has been actively involved with pro-Israel lobbying for decades. It isn't exactly a new hobby. Charles Kushner, Jared's dad, was basically writing checks to various causes that made Netanyahu happy long before anyone considered putting Jared in charge of, well, anything. We're talking serious money, consistently flowing towards folks who have a vested interest in the current status quo. It's not a secret, it's public record, and honestly, pretending this doesn't color things is just insulting. The New York Times reported Netanyahu literally stayed at their house in Jersey, like crashed on the couch. That level of closeness doesn't evaporate when you hand your son a vaguely defined diplomatic role and send him to broker peace deals. It means there are pre-existing relationships, assumptions, and probably a fair number of unspoken agreements floating around. Kushner apparently told Aaron David Miller, another former diplomat who seems perpetually exhausted by all this, that he wasn't interested in history, which is a stunningly blunt way of saying, I don't care about the decades of conflict, displacement, and power imbalances. The goal, according to Kushner, was to make it impossible for any Israeli prime minister to say no to Trump. And here's where things get really interesting. That's not a strategy for peace, that's a strategy for unchecked leverage. Trump's unwavering support of Israel, the shoulder-to-shoulder thing they keep mentioning, wasn't some act of moral clarity, it was capital. Political capital that Kushner and Witkoff could then use to, what? Negotiate with Hamas? Persuade Arab leaders? The whole operation functions on a foundation of asymmetrical power, built on decades of financial support and familial ties. So yeah, world peace is nice rhetoric, but it's hard not to see this as the long-game culmination of a very specific family agenda. It's just business, I guess. A truly depressing level of business. Right, so let's talk about the money. Because honestly, pretending this is all altruism feels exhausting. Jared Kushner's firm, Affinity Partners, isn't exactly a small operation. We're talking billions, plural, flowing in from Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE. These aren't pocket change investments. They're sovereign wealth funds, basically countries throwing serious weight behind his business ventures. It's like, if your landlord suddenly started brokering peace deals and you found out he also owned half the buildings involved, you'd raise an eyebrow, right? Matt Duss from the Center for International Policy called it open corruption. And look, I'm not going to pretend that's a hot take. It's less a scandal and more just the default setting of power. The fact that it's this blatant is maybe new, but the principle, not so much. People with money make decisions that benefit their money. Shocking. Then you get Caroline Leavitt, the White House spokesperson, doing damage control. She went on about Kushner being widely respected and donating his energy and time to achieve world peace. It's a masterclass in saying absolutely nothing while sounding vaguely important. Noble thing? Seriously? Like volunteering at a soup kitchen compared to potentially profiting off the reconstruction of an entire territory? The tone deafness is almost impressive, like they genuinely think this explanation will land. The implication, and it's pretty clear, is that because he's good at making deals, ethical concerns are just irrelevant. He's a deal guy, remember? Different sport. As if the rules of international diplomacy somehow evaporate when you close enough real estate transactions. It's not about a conflict of interest, it's about leveraging existing networks to maximize profit. And honestly, in this specific context, that feels less like a bug and more like the whole point. The ceasefire itself might be beneficial, I guess that's something, but understanding why anyone involved is motivated to see it happen requires acknowledging the very uncomfortable reality of what stands to gain financially from Gaza being rebuilt. It's not peace they are selling, it's opportunity. Right, so we've established the ceasefire happened, which is fine, and that everyone involved seems to be patting themselves on the back a lot. But let's pull at the thread for a second, because the idea that this is some triumph of human decency feels profoundly naive. The core issue isn't ending suffering, it's unlocking capital. The talk about deal guys, Kushner and Witkoff specifically, is revealing, honestly. It's not a skill set applicable to international relations generally, unless your international relation is as real estate. They aren't negotiating treaties, they're scoping land value. Think of it like this. Imagine trying to solve a plumbing problem with a mortgage broker. Sure, they might get the pipes eventually fixed, but their main concern is probably the potential for a flip. That's where the billions from Saudi Arabia and Qatar come in. It's not charity, it's seed money. Affinity Partners isn't some philanthropic organization. They see Gaza, or what remains of it, as an investment opportunity, a blank slate, if you will. The fact that there's a humanitarian disaster attached is inconvenient maybe, but also creates demand. Demand for construction, for infrastructure, for everything else that generates profit. And the White House isn't exactly hiding this. Caroline Leavitt calling it noble to have Kushner leverage his relationships, that's not diplomacy, that's a sales pitch. It's saying, don't look at the conflicts of interest, look at how efficient we are. The whole thing reeks of pre-positioning. The idea floated during Trump's first term about redevelopment is now being actively discussed, and Kushner has a direct line to the people with the money to make it happen. It's less world peace and more prime waterfront property, which, admittedly, might be enough for some people involved. A cynical take? Absolutely. But pretending otherwise feels willfully ignorant. So, the whole thing with Kushner is, it's not about what he WSIS officially, it's about what he isn't. No formal title, no decades steeped in State Department protocol, just a guy who happens to be married to Trump's daughter and knows how to move money around, which turns out to be shockingly effective when you're trying to nudge things along in the Middle East. The lack of official oversight is, frankly, the whole point. It allows for a kind of shadow diplomacy that wouldn't survive 5 minutes under normal circumstances. He can operate with a level of freedom and plausible deniability most diplomats could only dream of. Take this story about dictating an apology to Qatar. Netanyahu, after poking the bear with an airstrike, gets a phone call where Kushner and Witkoff basically write his script for him. Mature people do things, one official said. Right. Mature people leverage potential investment deals to get what they want. It's not about remorse. It's about maintaining the illusion of control and keeping those Gulf state funds flowing. They created a situation where saying sorry wasn't an act of contrition, but a business transaction. And honestly, that only works because Trump spent 4 years publicly declaring unwavering support for Israel. It built this weird dynamic where Arab leaders felt like they had to play ball with Kushner, even if it meant swallowing their pride and accepting terms dictated by someone whose main qualification is being good at real estate. They're engaging not because they trust the process or believe in some grand peace plan, but because they're terrified of getting on Trump's bad side, which, let's be real, is entirely possible when he considers Israel an ally with zero compromise. It's a masterclass in using leverage, a very unsettling one, admittedly, but effective nonetheless. The whole situation feels less like diplomacy and more like a particularly elaborate hostile takeover.